Hello, and welcome back to Sharing a Chapter a Day. This is Do, Ra, me, and today I will be reading Chapter 73 of Engagement in Peril by Dara Odoe. Chapter 73 is titled Road Trip to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. After hanging out with Benevolence and her family that day, I went to my mother's home and gathered my things and prepared myself for departure to my new duty station in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. So for the next few days, I hung out at home for a while, spent time with Benevolence, where we hung out with my nieces and nephews, taking them to the parks and nearby beaches. Before leaving for my new command, Benevolence had gotten permission from her work and decided to tag along with me while I drove to North Carolina. She took about a week off from work and asked if she could come with me. I, not one to disappoint, happily agreed and welcomed her to come along. Once it was decided, we gathered our belongings and necessities and drove away from Long Beach, California, heading east toward Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I said my goodbyes to my mother, my sibling, and Benevolence family as well. We both left for the trip to the East Coast. The road trip to North Carolina took us about 4 days. We left Long Beach on the 605 North to the 91 East interstate. After a good hour or so, we took the I-15 North toward Needles, and then from there I merged onto the I-40 East, headed toward the East Coast. I took the Interstate 40 East from the border of California to the East Coast, all the way to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina's base, North Carolina. Our road trip took us through a total of 8 U.S. states, listing from west to east from California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina. During our road trip to my new command, I didn't really want to share the driving with Benevolence. I was greedy in that sense because I like to drive my car, and I don't like to be a passenger when riding in a car. I had decided to drive the entire trip myself, speeding through all types of weather, rain or shine. I was zooming across the states, and for some reason, I wanted to get to North Carolina as soon as possible. The entire road trip took us about 4 days. We ended up taking our sweet time getting there, stopping for gas and food, and staying at various motels and hotels in several different states. It was nice to have Benevolence by my side then. She kept me awake and kept me company. We held hands and fondled each other throughout our road trip and travels. Several times during our road trip, Benevolence would give me head while I drove. That kept me going and caused me to speed several times. We talked about this and that as we drove on while contemplating of our past friends and what we've learned from each other. I told Benevolence of Shinshin and what a good-natured person he was and how much I have missed him. At times she joked that he and I were like kissing buddy, or butt buddies, she had implied, calling us queer at times. I didn't really like what she was saying. I didn't like what she was implying. I laughed about it though in front of her face, but at the same time I was a little irritated by Benevolence suggesting that Shinshin and I were queers or gay. She had no right to see Shinshin and me in that way or in that light. We were really close, male friends after all. She just didn't see and realize what Shinshin and I had then. She didn't realize what Shinshin really meant to me. Our bonds were quite the brotherhood, a loving bond between two men who adore each other dearly. Shinshin and I would have given our lives for each other if we had to. Our bond was just that thick. I remember an incident during our road trip while driving through Texas. There was a terrible storm. It was heavily pouring, and the road were overflowed with rainwater, and I was doing about 90 miles an hour in the rain on a two-lane highway then. The whole time I was aeroplaning above the water where my tire didn't even touch the blacktop asphalt. So I just relaxed and let the car take its course, and fortunately I was able to regain control shortly after, and we made it through that horrendous Texas storm safe and sound. Now, Benevolent was terrified of my recklessness in driving then. But I knew my Honda well, and she wouldn't let me down, and of course, luckily we made it through the horrendous downpour. Several times Benevolent raised her voice at me for being reckless and didn't worry about her safety or our safety. I apologized for my ignorance and stupidity to her, and we drove onward without any more arguments for a while. Yes, Dara. You were quite reckless then, Dara. You better watch yourself in the long run. You don't have that much luck left in you, you know. You need to be more careful nowadays. You're not as young or vital as you were once. You've been sickened. You've been infested. You've been infected from that bitch Delilah. You need to be much, you need to be much more cautious nowadays, as I warn myself of future events. During our road trip to East Coast, when we got tired, we rested. When we got hungry, we ate. And when we got horny, we'd fucked. We took breaks and stopped at various rest stop and gas station. We stayed one night in Santa Fe in the state of New Mexico. It was a nice motel that we stayed in that night, and the price was decent, and they were showing adult movies on television. While Benevolence was fast asleep after our shower and dinner, I stayed up to watch porn on the room's television. So I jacked up and masturbated while Benevolence was asleep. And when I was horny enough, I then woke her up and we fucked throughout the rest of the night, whether she was in the mood to or not. Whether she was in the mood to make love or not, we had sex anyway. I was quite aggressive then that night. I was pretty rough sexually on Benevolence then that night. I grabbed and yanked at her bosom and ass, picturing her, imagining her that she was Eileen. I pounded and pounded into her, and as hard I could, while she took all the pain that I inflicted upon her with little complaint. I guess I was imagining and picturing that Benevolent was Eileen then, and giving it to her as hard as I had given it to Eileen several weeks back in Newport. I was lucky I didn't blurt out Eileen's name or Shinzen's name then. That have would have been some shit then, huh? Would have been weird. I was really careful not to come inside Benevolence. I wasn't ready for fatherhood yet, so every time that I was about to ejaculate, I would quickly withdraw my rod out of her and squirt it all over her abdomen, face, and ass and face instead. Now, as for Eileen, I've never pulled out, so I'm sure I might be somebody's father. So hopefully, maybe if I see a person that looks like me in the future, it could be my son and Arlene's sons and, well, our son. But Nevin didn't really like to give me head, so that night I was doing all the work. While I ravaged at her body, she pretended to enjoy what I was giving to her, but I could sense that she didn't really want it. So the sex didn't last as long as I wanted to. And after I finished, without bothering to clean myself up, I laid back, closed my eyes, and fell asleep, staining the sheet and bed that she and I were asleep on that night. It was weird, but Evelyn wasn't in the mood then. I guess she had a lot on her mind then. Perhaps she sensed that I had been unfaithful while I was away in Rhode Island. Or maybe because she was unfaithful while she was there in Long Beach while I was away. I guess she wasn't in the mood after all. Perhaps I should have come clean and told her all about Eileen and the other girls that I had quickies with, like Tilly and Ann and, my hangout with Vanny back in San Diego. Oh well, I got mine that night, anyhow. You're one selfish son of a bitch, Dara. You need to treat her better. The next morning, after getting ready and checking out of the motel, we drove onward east. From New Mexico, we drove through Texas and then to Arkansas, and once we were tired, we decided to sleep and take rest at a rest stop that night. You know, we had warning before that we're not supposed to sleep at rest stop. No, things could happen, but we slept there anyway. We ate what we had bought from the gas station store, sandwiches and such, and before going to sleep, Benevolent and I groped and fondled each other, grabbing and pulling at each other's appendages. I squeezed and bit at her bosom while she would jerk me off and on, jerk me up and down, and we also passionately kissed for a long, quiet time that dark evening, steaming and fogging up the whole window in the process before we both fell asleep in each other's arm in my cherry flame Honda Civic. Once we awoke the next morning, after using the restroom facility to freshen up, we brushed our teeth and defecated what we had in our intestines and colon then. We drove onward toward Tennessee and decided to stay the night at Nashville. Once we arrived in Nashville, Tennessee, we got a room at a motel that was closest to the interstate, and afterward we hung around the town, going to the local grocery store to get some snacks and goodies, and got some Chinese food from a nearby Asian restaurant. Nashville, Tennessee was quite dirty and terrible then. It looked pretty crappy to me. Roads were terrible, and it wasn't like the stuff you saw on television with the country music channel and such. No, Nashville here had a bunch of bad neighborhoods. I saw drug dealing going on down, and it wasn't there, and it wasn't that I had imagined, and it wasn't what I had imagined what it would be. It was like East Los Angeles then all over again. As I look about in its Nashville was tagged up and graffiti riddled street and alleyway. It was weird. I expected a country town. After eating well at the Chinese restaurant and filling up on Asian cuisine, we returned to our rented room. That night in the motel room, I had the urge to have sex and really wanted to fuck Benevolence brains out, but her womanly menstrual period had started that day, and I didn't really want to smell like sardine, and she sure as hell wasn't in the mood either for any sexual or personal contact. She was pretty upset at me now for no particular reason, so we slept side by side and warmly cuddled throughout the night in each other's arm. It was nice all the same, being able to cuddle. I smiled and slept soundly then in her arms as we both fell asleep, fast asleep in that dark Nashville night. The next morning we took some breakfast at a local diner, and after talking about our schedule and where we needed to be, since I was only one state away from my final destination, we came to an agreement and I decided to put Benevolence on a plane back home to Long Beach, California. I drove her to the Nashville International Airport, BNA, and paid for a plane ticket, one-way ticket to LAX that afternoon. I was able to get a military discount on the purchase ticket, and luckily I had the cash to pay for it then. Seems you were eager to let go of Benevolence then, Dara. I guess you had enough of her. Did you? And you were thinking about her workstation situation as well. You wanted her to get back to her home and be with her family. You were kind enough to pay for everything, though. You bastard. I had no idea what or how you were thinking then, Dara. Benevolence didn't argue about going back to Long Beach then, when you had advised it. In a way, you were happy that she was going back home, and you're now on your own again. We hung around for several hours in the airport, taking pictures of each other in the airport, holding hands and caressing each other. We warmly kissed, hugged, and said our goodbyes. She was going back to Long Beach, California then. We hugged and kissed some more, and I told her that I loved her, and I would call her as soon as I got to my new command in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I saw her to her terminal and waited until her plane departed from my sight. She is now on her way home, and I returned to my car and once again was on my own, and I drove to my final destination. Once her plane departed, I continued on with my journey to Camp Lejeune. I left the airport and drove on, following direction on my U.S. road map atlas, before getting to the designated base of Marine Corps Base, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I was tired from today's event, so I stayed the night at an okay motel that night, which was run by an Indian family from India. Back then, there was no GPS or cell phones, so everything I did was looking at a map by hand and following my instinct, and using payphone. While there in the motel that night, I watched adult flicks and masturbated all throughout the night, just like at every hotel and motel that I had stayed in days earlier. While I whacked off to my heart's content, memories of all the girls that I had come to know and had relations with came to mind. I jerked off to the vision and memories of Candy, Veronica, Cindy, Tiffany, Jenny, Maggie, Mary, Dim, Kantasuk, Loanne, Kelly, Suzanne, Beverly, Ann S., Shin Shin, Basics Heather, Ann H., Nicole Tilly, Eileen, Benevolence, and yes, I thought of Shin Shin as well. He was my beloved friend after all, and I fell sound asleep, and I fell asleep soundly afterward. As a result, I got a good long sleep for the rest of the night after harshly whacking and damaging myself to deep slumber that lonely, brisk night. The next morning around 1100, I awoke, freshened up and defecated, and once packed and ready to leave, I checked out and headed to the Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and arrived there about 6 hours later. The road trip from Long Beach, California to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina was something I will remember. I drove through 8 different states, saw and did some things I wanted to see and do. I had my girlfriend and lover with me, and we fucked part of the ways there. And of course, I got my nuts off in every state. While driving on the freeway and byway, my surrounding was beautiful, with luscious natural scenery as the autumn foliage showed its colorful essence as I drove through my last state to my final destination. Driving through the mountainside was cool, refreshing, and serene then. At times I was still lost in thoughts of my missing friend Shinshin. I often thought about how he was and what he was up to, hoping that he was well and healthy, and whatever he was doing, that God Almighty was looking out for him. He deserved that much at least for all that shit he had been going through, and all that shit he'd been going through in life as well. God hasn't always been there for Shinshin, and God owes him that much. Thinking to myself then while I drove eastbound, I had thought that the detailer at the Newport, Rhode Island had made a big mistake sending me here to North Carolina because Dr. Fitzhugh wasn't done with me yet, and they had deceivingly sent me off and away without his permission. Once I drove through Jacksonville, North Carolina, and about an hour later, I arrived to my new command at that damn Marine Corps base, Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. After checking into Marine Base Corps base of Camp Marine Corps, North Carolina, After checking into Marine Corps Base of Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, home of the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force, I checked in at the Personnel Department, got my necessary paper and stamps, and got my vehicle decal and instruction from the Security Department where I needed to go next. After finishing off the rest of my check-ins and registration that day, I snuck several minutes to call my mom and Benevolence to tell them that I had arrived to my final destination safe and sound. Benevolent was at work, so I left messages with her mother at their home on Seabright Avenue on the west side of Long Beach. After checking in at the new command, going through security, decal, personnel, and other necessary places required of new check-ins, I was assigned to Weapons Company, and they didn't know what to do with me once I arrived there. I had told them my past command and my current mental situation there back in Newport, Rhode Island, and also showed them their company commander my military medical record, and wondered, why am I being assigned to Weapons Company? Thank you for listening. This is the end of Chapter 73. Be on the lookout for Chapter 74, titled Unwanted and Unwarranted Company. This is Doe, Ra, me, and I'll see you later. Thank you.